Well, welcome to Stimson Center. Well, thank you for joining us today. My name is Yun Sun. I'm the director of the China program and the co-director of the East Asia program here at the Stimson Center. And welcome to join our event today on the discussion of the role of South Korea in the era of great power competition between U.S. and China, which is the main theme that everybody is talking about these days. So the intensifying concept of great power competition between U.S. and China, of course, has major implications for the future of the Korean Peninsula. It's reunification, the denuclearization process, and also the U.S. alliance system in Northeast Asia. And most directly, I think people's speculation is China could play more of an obstructionist role in all those issues in order to maintain leverage against the United States during this great power competition. And these prospects pose significant challenges to the policy of South Korea, politically and in terms of its security policy. Complicating the matter even more for Seoul is the trade war that has been ongoing since last year, which is reshaping the global and regional supply chain and poses a risk of aggravating the competition on the Korean Peninsula. So with the U.S.-China relations at a historically low point since 1970s, understanding South Korea's position and dilemma between an ally and a strategic partner and a neighbor is central to assessing South Korea's policy direction. So today we have the pleasure of having two experts, one from South Korea and one from China, to explain to us what's their assessment and their observation about the current competition, the impact over the Korean Peninsula and over the policy of the South Korean government. So to begin with, the first expert that we have is Dr. Byung Kwang Park, Senior Research Fellow from the Institute for National Security Strategy and adjunct professor with Korean University. He has been advising the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Joint Chief of Staff of the South Korean the ROK Joint Chiefs of Staff and Air Force, and also the National Unification Advisory Council. He was previously the president of the Korean Association of Area Studies and has been a research fellow at various institutions in Japan, in Taiwan, and also in South Korea. My understanding is that you visit China on a monthly basis?
Yes.
Pretty much.
Maybe.
And Dr. Park will primarily focus on South Korea's position and the South Korean policy in this great power competition. And then after Dr. Park, we would like to invite Dr. Zheng Jiyong, who is director of the Center for Korean Studies at the Fudan University, and also the Secretary General of Shanghai Institute of Korean Studies, to explain to us China's calculation and how China views the competition with the United States in the context of the future of the Korean Peninsula. So for the proceedings today, we would like to first invite Dr. Park to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
And followed by Professor Zheng to talk about Chinese perspective. And then we will open it to Q&A. One, just as a disclaimer for both of our speakers, the views that they are going to express here today are their own personal views. Do not represent the governments of either South Korea or China. And I'll just put it out there.
Okay.
So Dr. Park, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Byung Kwang Park, and I'm a senior research fellow of the Institute for National Security Strategy in Seoul. I'm very happy to have a chance to present in front of you and communicate with other experts here. And I'd like to thank Director Sun Win and other staff of the Stimson Center. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to confess one thing, that my English is very poor. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to study in USA or in the Western world. So my English is not so fluent. So I'd like to ask you very generous patience and understanding about my English.
Don't worry about that. I'm worse than you.
Okay.
Anyway. Don't worry about that. I'll be the support.
Okay, let me start. Actually, today's presentation title is U.S. U.S.-China great power competition and the implications for South Korea. Actually, the competition between the established power and the rising power is not new. As you know, from a historical viewpoint, there was always a confrontation between established hegemonic power and the challenging rising power. However, the recent competition and conflict between the United States and China is becoming intensifying and getting worse. Furthermore, both great powers conflicts are bringing concerns and challenges to its neighbor countries. Especially in case of Korea, the dilemma between the US and China is quite complicated and difficult. The hegemonic competition between the US and China is a big challenge for South Korea now. Today, I would like to share over my personal thinking and analysis on the perceptions and policy directions of South Korea, which faces in US-China hegemonic competition. Yes. At first, I'd like to introduce how South Korean experts evaluate the recent US-China conflict. We can find that there is three kinds of perspectives on the US-China conflicts, especially on the recent trade war. If possible, please compare with your point of view. The first viewpoint is that trade war is just a simple trade war. They regard trade war as just only for Trump's presidential elections on November next year. They think the trade war will end after next year's presidential election. The second viewpoint is that trade war is a strategic competition between US and China. They think the trade war is not simple, and it is more complicated and multidimensional strategic competition with China. The third viewpoint is that trade war is a beginning of hegemonic war. They think the trade war is a start of a full-scale competition over hegemony in the 21st century between US and China. There may be debate about whether the recent US-China confrontation should be evaluated as a strategic competition or hegemonic competition. In my view, the recent US-China conflict is more appropriate to view as a prologue of a long-term hegemonic competition rather than a strategic competition. I think it is dangerous to look at the current situation as simply a dispute for trade deficit or for winner trade advantages. And it is also a prejudice that Trump is using trade war only for victory of a presidential election next year. Then, next, what is the difference between strategic competition and hegemonic competition? I think the strategic competition pursues to solve problems through negotiations despite conflict in an independent structure. Therefore, the current US-China relations probably can be defined as a strategic competition. However, the new hegemonic competition of the 21st century is evolving into a new form of confrontation that goes beyond total war to avoid destruction. So we need to know that the new hegemony war is a competition of international norms and order over the world's political and economic dominance. Now, Trump administration pursues dominance of the high technology under the motto of America First. The traditional hegemony competition defines the opponent as an enemy and minimize the room for compromise. The Trump administration does not define China as an enemy, but U.S. government described China as a competitor and a revisionist in its national security strategy of 2017. Actually, this is not much different from the concept of enemy in the Cold War era and in the 20th century. The new hegemony war of the 21st century is characterized by a confrontation surrounding the rule of international norms and order to avoid the danger of the destruction of the two rivals by total war. Okay. If you see this picture, then you can understand now the world witnessed the confrontation between the US-centered alliance power and the China-centered continental coalition power. And the next figure shows sea power and continental power meeting on the Korean Peninsula. That is Korea's dilemma of choice. Actually, U.S.-China confrontation makes South Korea difficult to support only one side because South Korea located between the 70 years ally and the largest strategic cooperative partner. As you know, South Korea has maintained a military alliance with the United States for nearly 70 years after the Korean War. And also, Korea established diplomatic relations with China in 1992, and then established a strategic cooperative partnership in 2008. Maybe you know that China is the largest trading partner of South Korea, and Korea is the third largest trading partner of China. For example, last year, Korea and China traded over $250 billion. China occupies about 25% of Korea's total trade. And there is more than 200 flights in a day between Korea and China. And there is more than 60,000 students studying, Chinese students studies in Korea. And also, there is more than 60,000 Korean students studies in China. However, for a long time, Korea has maintained the so-called separation policy of security and economy between U.S. and China. It is that depended on the U.S. for security and depended on the China for economy. However, if the U.S. and China's hegemony competition intensifies and continues, I think the South Korea's separation policy of security and economy will be difficult to sustain. And another very important one thing is that South Korea afraid if U.S.-China hegemony competition intensify, both great power countries will have less interest in the North Korean nuclear issues. Now South Korea is increasingly facing a dilemma of choice between the United States and China. And the U.S.-China conflict has narrowing South Korea's position and choice in the international stage. We remember that South Korea has already been interact in the confrontation between the U.S. and China, has become the target of economic retaliation from China, because of THAAD deployment of a couple of years ago. Let me share of my personal experience or background of the THAAD deployment. When I look back the Korean Peninsula situation in January 6 in 2016, January 6, North Korea conducted first nuclear test. And then January 11th, I got a chance to participate the non-official advisory committee for NSCC at Blue House. At that time, actually I have suggested that you have to decide the deployment of THAAD because U.S. pressure toward Korea to deploy THAAD, and China also pressure toward Korea not deploy THAAD. However, if we need to protect our people and property from the North Korea's nuclear and missile threat, then it's time to decide deploy or not THAAD. And after that, January 15th, I was very surprised because former President Park Geun-hye officially announced that South Korea will start talking with USA on the deployment of THAAD. Now, I don't say that because of my suggestion we deployed THAAD. That's not true. However, at that time, I believed that THAAD will be help our protection from North Korean threat. Anyway, I guess Korea may face the dilemma of choice again at any time because of a lot of issues led by USA. For example, personally, I am very worried about the Indo-Pacific participation and intermediate range nuclear force treaty issues, and so on. For example, recently, USA government asked that South Korea not use Chinese mobile company Huawei's telecommunication equipment. It's not a small deal to South Korea. Always we have a dilemma between US and China. Finally, finally, I'd like to talk about the South Korea's considerations and policy directions. Before introduce South Korea's policy direction, I'd like to make it clear again that Korea's policy direction here is my personal opinion, not the Korean government position. First of all, I think we need accurate situational perceptions. One of the most important things in our policy direction in the context of U.S.-China confrontation is accurate situational perceptions. We need to have a clear and correct perception that the U.S.-China confrontation will not end in a short term. And we need to know that it is not just a trade war, but a prologue of a long-term hegemony war. And second, I think we need to establish the concept of strategic national interests. As one of the middle power countries, Korea needs to establish the concept of strategic national interests and expand its diplomatic space at the same time by cooperating with another middle power countries, just as China emphasized core interest and the United States emphasized vital interest. I think it is necessary to define what is Korea's unyielding strategic national interest and diplomatic basic principles. Another word thing that we need avoid one-sided bandwagon logic and behavior. Korea needs to avoid the one-side bandwagon behavior, which choose USA or China between the two great powers whenever U.S.-China conflict break out. Therefore, we need to very cautious bandwagon diplomacy for either the U.S. or China, and we should consider hatching strategy or issue-based support policy based on the national interest. However, if the U.S.-China conflicts intensify, it is necessary to establish a strategy based on the U.S.-ROK alliance in the short term. And at the same time, we need to set a goal for minimize the loss of national interest conflict with China relationship. And then I think we need organize a U.S.-China relations task force team at the Blue House. South Korea's decision-making system is very top-down style. So Blue House role is very important. So I think the South Korean government should organize a U.S.-China relations task force team at the Blue House to dealing with U.S.-China confrontations. In fact, I have suggested that the task force team should be made up of skilled and experienced professionals from the government and academia. I think the U.S.-China relations task force team should be a standing organization to establish mid to long-term strategies, as well as response to current issues. The world is now watching the beginning of the hegemony war between U.S. and China. Many countries are confusing about these situations and are struggling to find response strategy. However, U.S.-China competition probably serve as an opportunity to middle power countries for expand diplomatic mediation role and strategic space. Therefore, South Korea wants to build a strong networking with other middle power countries in the world. Especially Korea wants to upgrade network with Mexico, Australia, India, Indonesia, Turkey, and so on. This is because effort to expand our diplomatic autonomy space and minimize pressure from the great power countries. Finish my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Park, for your very comprehensive examination of the debate in South Korea about how to assess this great power competition between U.S. and China. I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions. Like my top question is, South Korea is not a passive player in this competition process. And what are some of the areas that South Korea can actually shape or play a more active role instead of just passively receiving the consequences of the great power competition? But we can talk about that later.
Okay.
And you have about 15 to 20 minutes to think about that. And Dr. Zheng is actually, I forgot to mention, Dr. Zheng is spending 1 year in Washington, D.C. as a visiting fellow here at the Stimson Center. He is one of the top Korean Peninsula expert in the Chinese academia. So we would love to hear your insights.
Yeah.
Dr. Zheng.
Thank you, Dr. Sun and Dr. Park. And Dr. Park gave us a very detailed picture to describing how U.S. and China amid the U.S.-China competition, how ARC does. I would like to talk about the amid the U.S.-China strategic competition and how China's policy toward the Korean Peninsula. Give me that. Yeah. Mainly, I agreed with Dr. Park. He said now China and the U.S. is in some kind of the trade war or some kind of the every kind of war. But I think as we all know, China and the U.S., China is riding very, very fast. And U.S. is very, very worried about that. How China became, and how China's path and development path, how China will go to some kind of democracy or some kind of that. But from my point of view, I think that two great powers, at the same time, they are rising up. They just like the famous saying that one bull is in a China shop, it will break the China. But now the situation is that we have two bulls. One is Trump and one is Xi. So we have a trade war, we have a chip war, we have many kind of war. I think that we are now in the broad scale and in the deep scale. We have some kind of the complexity and the some kind of the we are in a mixed war. So for China, we think the competition between China and the U.S. make China so awareness of the Korean Peninsula. But as Dr. Price said, for RK and DPRK, there always are very hard and difficult choices for RK and DPRK, because as we all know, in the late 19th century, the Korean Peninsula have three choices. One is Japan, one is China, and one is Russia. But that time, the fate of the Korean Peninsula were very, very bad. So now, the Korean Peninsula is also standing on the turning point of the Korean Peninsula, understand the competition between China and the U.S. So how China do now? We think this kind of not so good competition makes China refocus on the Korean Peninsula. We know the first is that we think that the geopolitical and geo-economical situation in the Korean Peninsula is more important than the past. And the second one is that we should make our diplomacy policy on the Korean Peninsula. We should refocus on it. And the third one is that we think that, as we all know, in the past time, in China, we have many debates about the policy toward the Korean Peninsula. But now we have only one voice. That is, we should refocus on the Korean Peninsula now. And I think the Korean Peninsula is standing in the very important, very key point now. So this kind of channel back to the Korean Peninsula have some backgrounds. And one is that we think that we should change our policy from the some kind of the so-called strategic patterns to an aggressive and promise access. And the third is that we should let our policy toward RK. We should, from the past, the strategic utilization to a financial and technological overtake. And the third is that we should rethink about the value of the DPRK. We should change our policy from preferring North Korea politically and South Korea economically to a more balanced ones. And from 2012, when President Xi took the office, he think the situation of the Korean Peninsula is so serious, so he made some decision about that. He said that the Korean Peninsula, it is our business, and we must manage and control the problems, and we can deal with it very well. So his instructions is given to all the scholars and to study about the Korean Peninsula. So our objective is about the first one is to avoid war and chaos. And all we said is because the Korean Peninsula is our doorway, it is very, very important. And the second one is that China should cool down the urgent situation to make DPRK to abandon his new nuclear weapons. And we should meet some cooperation with the US. And the third one is that we think that a nuclear DPRK is also a threat to China. But at the same time, it is the threat to Japan, US, and RK. And the fourth one is that we think that we should make the Korean Peninsula issues more connections with nuclear, and to find more tools to compete with the US and to one DPRK. And the fourth one is that China wants stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, but China does not fear any chaos and war in the Korean Peninsula, and China, I think China is ready for any case. No, you see. And China's Korean Peninsula policy has some principles. And one is that we think that we should make the progress of solving the problems become some kind of platform and paradigm of China's role in affecting the international affairs. And the second one is that we think that by giving creative ideas and new thinkings, some kind of roadmap and proposals, and we can develop a very new force for make DPRK to abandon the new nuclear weapons. And the third one is that with cooperation with the US, we can find a new way which can lead to a bilateral, a better relationship between China and the US. And we and China, I think, are taking some actions now. The most important thing is that China decisively abandoned the strategy of keeping out of the mess in the Korean Peninsula, and now actively interfere in the Korean Peninsula to reform and to reshape a new Korean Peninsula. And at the same time, China made it very clear how the Korean Peninsula situation is and what is China's primary interest now. I think China now shows a very strong view of stopping the war and chaos. And now China have the firm decision of opposing DPRK of having new nuclear weapons. And we oppose that DPRK to utilize these situations to get more benefits. So the second one is with these actions, China pursued DPRK and America to sit down to talk. And the third one is that China give more proposal to pushing DPRK and to change his mind. As we all know, North Korea often thinks that he can protect and getting his security from the nuclear weapons, but we do not think so. We should change his mind from it to some kind of the keeping security from the development of social and economical development. And for our, yes, here. And for China's policy toward RK, I think we can divide it the policy to several parts. The one is that we think that the basic things and the handle and the keys in the Korean Peninsula is the U.S. and the DPRK. We should to make focus on U.S. and DPRK. And the two is that Dr. Park has said the start deployment, but we can think in a different way. We think that for RK, we are now China is increasing the cooperation with DPRK and Russia to deal with the deployment of THAAD and the coming SM-3, and now it is in the situation of the NF collapse. And we basically think that RK should not be some kind of the military attacking all the posts to China. And then the fourth is that the third is that it's a very obvious thing that China is now playing some card, some kind of the DPRK card. As we all know, when Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang in June, he introduced the general mail to Kim Jong-un. That was a very, very strong signal. And economically, we think that China is increasing China-Japan RK cooperation now, and the cooperation between China and RK in the third countries, and we want to increase the capabilities of withstanding risks now, especially under the background of the China-U.S. competition. And then the five is that culturally, China is promoting the perception of culture with Chinese characteristics and some kind of Confucian community. China wants to increase local exchange and economic cooperation to increase the awareness of the community of common destiny. And I would like to give you some kind of implications to RK. Now, I think the first one is that amid China and U.S. competition, it is very dangerous for RK to take one side. I think now the most preferred action is that wait and see. We think that a clear trend is that China-U.S. competition will last a long time. Anybody cannot predict one is the end time. So for our case, you should wait now. And the second one is that we often said patience is a virtue. To consume more time to make a decision is better. And the third one, toward China and the US, RK can promote local government, can promote the exchange between local government, such as Shandong province and Shanghai. And the fourth one is that China thinks that culture and education exchange can make more room and time for RK. And the political one is that RK can strengthen the lobby activists here now. We think RK can do more here in DC. Yeah, I will stop here. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you, Dr. Zheng. Thank you for showing us that actually you do agree with Dr. Park that there is a hegemonic competition between U.S. and China, and the future of that competition is not necessarily very accommodating for the third parties like South Korea. And thank you for also pointing out that in China's policy, North Korea is now being played as a card in order to both, I guess, facilitate the cooperation with the United States, but also to enhance China's leverage in the competition with the United States. So, as moderator, if I may ask the first questions, Dr. Park, and just like what I just mentioned, what are some of the ways that South Korea can actively shape the situation for itself instead of just passively reacting to it? Are there any space, or such space simply does not exist, and South Korea should just prepare to react to the pressure from both great powers? And for Dr. Zheng, a simple question: what is China's desired endgame in the Korean Peninsula? You talked about China playing North Korea as a card. China not afraid of war and chaos. China wants to use its leverage and also strengthening its relationship with North Korea and Russia. And those are not necessarily positive development as perceived from here. So what is China trying to seek in the Korean Peninsula, if I may? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Frankly speaking, I think Korea has a very weak autonomy to dealing with China and USA confrontation. As I mentioned, South Korea has to maintain the strong alliance with USA to solve the North Korean nuclear issues and also for our security. And same as that, we need to maintain a very good relationship with China for our economic benefit. So, actually, South Korea has very weak autonomy to dealing with USA-China confrontation. However, personally, I think that we cannot always maintain a one-side bandwagon policy towards USA, because the world politics, the international structure is changing now. Very frankly speaking, we don't know who will be the last winner in the world politics. After 30 years or after 50 years, I don't know. If I choose China, that means we choose neighbor countries. But if I choose USA, that means I choose have a same value and same system country. But the problem is that China is too close to South Korea, and USA is too far from Korea, geopolitically. As a third world nation, I think the South Korea need to choose a last winner. But in short term, I think we should consider about the South Korea-US alliance. That's my opinion.
How popular is that view in South Korea, if I may ask?
Popular?
How popular is that opinion in South Korea?
My thinking?
Sorry.
I don't know, actually, I don't know. But I'm working at the policy institution, so just I want to say my thinking.
Thank you for that vote of confidence on U.S. leadership. As an American, I have to say. And Dr. Zheng,
Yeah.
what's China's vision for the end game?
Reading for China, I think that toward the Korean Peninsula, I think China is seeking some kind of the stability in the area. For China, China has 880 miles border with DPRK. And when we talk about the North Korea issues, we should think about China, what China is doing, what China will do. So we are very aware of that. We should push the stability in China's northeast area. It is important for Liaoning province and for Jilin province. We suffered from the two provinces suffered from the Korean Peninsula issues for almost 70 years. We cannot avoid the chaos or war in the Korean Peninsula. For as we know, if given the war in the Korean Peninsula, many refugees and defectors they will flee to China. So we think that it is very important for China. This is the first object, and the second one is that we think that North Korea's nuclear weapons is also a security threat to China now. The Korean Peninsula should have no nuclear weapons. That is our second object. And the third one is that we China and the Korean Peninsula, we have a long history. So we should exchange and travel. We should make it sure that we are safe. Yeah.
So that sounds very much as a consistent theme of China's claim of its interest on the Korean Peninsula: stability, peace, and denuclearization.
Yeah.
So there's not really a change to that, like what you said. So what has President Xi done differently?
And as we all know, in the former administration, we kept up the math in the Korean Peninsula. We think the Korean Peninsula issue, they are the issues between U.S. and DPRK. We should make some room for their talks. We do not to interfere in that. But now, as you all know, President Xi and Kim Jong-un, they met for 5 times. And President Xi, he wants to change the very very bad stance in the Korean Peninsula. He went to initiative to interfere in the Korean Peninsula. I think this is the very big different from Xi to Hu or Jiang.
So he's more active. He is
Yeah.
trying to actively
Yeah.
interfere or intervene and trying to shape the course of the process. And
Yeah.
instead of leaving the conversation between U.S. and North Korea, now China says that we want to be a part of the dialogue as well.
So as he has said, the Korean Peninsula issues is our business. Yeah.
Really? Did China say that?
I
Korean
think
Peninsula issue is our business, our meaning Chinese business?
but in Chinese it is very different from that. We think that China thinks that 要管.
It means China
Yes.
has to manage it.
Yeah, 要管住，要管好. How to say? It is my personal view.
The question from the Chinese reporter, is that the official position or that's the personal interpretation? All right, that's very interesting answers to very intriguing questions. So with that, we will open the floor to the Q&A session. And as a request, two requests. First of all, please identify yourself. And secondly, please be brief with either your comment or your questions. Thank you. The gentleman in the back.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I'd like to direct this to the Korean visitor. Of course, here we have, in terms of this concept of rising power and existing hegemonic power, this Harvard professor, Graham Allison, has made quite a reputation for writing books on that. And his analysis was, historically, this usually has a bad outcome when you have that type of competition or confrontation. And he says that last December he was in Beijing and talked to the top personal advisor to Xi Jinping, who told him, we had some doubts about your thesis about the rising power and such in the past, but right now we totally embrace it. This is what's happening. So he told Graham Allison, so we're hoping that the U.S. can see that this is not going to have a good outcome in the direction it's going. We ought to somehow think about what happened in the past and figure out a way to avoid this type of chaotic outcome. So my question is, could South Korea do anything to contribute to that type of reassessment of alternatives to a bad outcome, particularly because it's been my observation that the leading Asian experts here in D.C. reject Graham Allison's thesis entirely. To give an extreme example, Steve Bannon, who actively attacks him as a sellout to China, taking this route, i.e. trying to avoid disaster. So it seemed to me this committee you were suggesting might play a role in doing those types of assessments about how the U.S. and China could avoid a disastrous outcome of this competition.
So what is South Korea's attitude towards associated this trapped narrative? And what can they do to help avoid it?
At first, I'd like to say that based on the theory, the established hegemony power has three kinds of options towards rising power. The first one is that hegemony power wants to surrender or frustrate the rising power. And second goal is that intervene the rising power and following the established power. That's an engagement policy. And third one is that delay rising power's development as much as possible. Now, I think the Trump administration's goal is the first one. Now, USA wants to surrender or frustrate China's rising. And then, but I think we must avoid the clash of great powers. So I think both of them, both countries, need to continue dialogue. As you know, the China-U.S. relationship can be described as a strategic mistrust. So, if possible, like South Korea or Japan or any other middle country, find a role mediation role to increase both countries' strategic trust. So, if possible, I don't know this is possible or not. However, if possible, Japan, Korea, actually the Japan and Korea is USA's alliance, so it's not so good. But other countries, Singapore or any other countries, can be a role, mediation role. For example, give a place to U.S. and China to negotiation, not in the Washington or not in the Beijing. For example, in the Singapore or Ireland or any other country, mediation countries. So, if possible, South Korea also wants to find that kind of mediation role. And another thinking is that middle powers, not only in South Korea, but also any other middle power countries, should expand our role space. To get it done, I think we need to coalition between the middle power countries, like Australia, Turkey, Indonesia, and so on.
So a network of mid-sized powers that they can align their interests with
decrease the room for great powers competition and confrontation. Decrease the space.
Because there is a third pole of an alliance of the
like this kind of story.
That's very visionary. Okay. Well, moving on.
Because I'm sorry, but because
okay.
During the great powers competition, both countries need coalition power. So USA persuade another countries. China also need to persuade other countries.
Okay, moving on. The gentleman in the front, please.
Yes, hi, Tim Savage with the State Department.
There's a mic. So please hold. Thank you.
Tim Savage with the State Department. Just, Dr. Pak, you mentioned, you said that as the strategic competition or hegemonic competition increases between U.S. and China, that they'll both lose interest in the North Korean nuclear issue. I wonder if you could elaborate on that some more, please.
Yes. I guess. Now the situation is starting point. The U.S.-China hegemony war. But this is the starting point, just only the starting point. That means between U.S. and China has a lot of co-working space, including North Korean nuclear issues. Even they doing a trade war and a confrontation. However, USA and China, they express really wants to cooperate on the North Korean nuclear issues. However, if the great powers competition intensify, then maybe their cooperation space may be more and more decreased. So I'm afraid that in the future, China may be trying to use North Korean issues as a leverage toward USA. And USA also just interested in surrendering China. So USA and China less interested in North Korean issues in the future. That was my worry about this.
Just one said U.S. is trying to surrender China. It's not U.S. trying to surrender to China, but U.S. making China surrender. Okay. That's perfect. Moving on to this side, this gentleman in front, please.
Hi, my question is for Professor Zheng.
Could you please identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Connor Swank. I work at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which is a think tank just up the road. My question is for Professor Zheng. You mentioned a couple times that a nuclear North Korea would threaten China's security. Could I ask you to elaborate on that and explain how you think a nuclear North Korea could be a threat to China?
De facto nuclear North Korea since 2006. And how is that a threat?
Yes. China thinks that North Korea's nuclear is a threat now because we have several factors. One is that when North Korea had nuclear tests, our Yanbian area is very close to the border. It's from the test point to Yanbian is only about 70 kilos. The schools and the buildings in Yanbian area, we have very big gap. Under the earth, we have many deep gap. And the people who are living there, they feel very unsafety. The second one is that, as we all know, nuclear test will pollute the underground water, and for several decades, after several decades, the water will flow to China. We think that it is a very big threat to China people. And the third one is that if North Korea keep nuclear test now, the UK, Japan, even other countries or areas, they will be provoked by departing. And we all know in Seoul, we think that someone is want to build the organization of South Korea's nuclear weapons. That we name that the domino effect of weapons. We do not want another nuclear state beside China? Thank you.
Well, you normally say that if you want to deal with the country, you have to find out where it goes and keep pushing it. So since you mentioned that one of China's top concerns is for South Korea to conduct a nuclear arms race, is that a policy option? Is that a popular policy option in South Korea?
Not popular.
Not popular.
I noticed.
Not popular.
Any elaboration?
Actually, the very conservative person, they insist that we should develop our own nuclear weapons. But it's not popular. And actually, I had researched about the possibility. That's not possible. Because now, Korea in the NPT system, if we want to develop own nuclear weapons, first you have to go out the NPT system. And you cannot survive.
As well as conservative. The gentleman will be next.
Thank you. Brendan Mulvaney from the China Aerospace Studies Institute. Question for Dr. Park. I'm trying to understand what you mean by this hegemonic competition, what your vision of your understanding of it, and I'm trying to understand, is there an ideological component to that? And if so, could you explain it? And if not, can you then explain what that means to me?
I'm sorry, but as I said, now we witness the U.S. China Hegemony work. The news. That's my own perception. That's my own perception. I already introduced that South Korean expert has a three kind of perception toward U.S. trade war or U.S. China Competition. But I belong to the third point, hegemony. But when I insist we witnessing the U.S. China hegemony war, there is one condition. As I mentioned, the 20th century's hegemony war is different from the 21st century's hegemony. In the 21st century, especially on the Cold War era, one side, great power, regard another great power as an enemy. However, in the 21st century, there is no enemy conception. No. One side, great power, cannot describe another great power as an enemy. Because both countries have a very scared conventional weapons, not only conventional weapons, but also have a lot of nuclear weapons. So, cannot describe as an enemy. But USA described China as a revisionist and Chinese power. Another one thing is, in the 20th century, in the past time, the one side great power goal is to demolish, destroy the other great power. However, now in the 21st century, it's totally different. As I said, in the 21st century, great powers' goal is to dominate the international law and international norm, and dominate the high techno power. So I still believe we are now witness the prologue of hegemony. I think so.
I think that's a very interesting because there's a lot of dimension of this.
Of course, include values, systems, and ideology. China has a communist ideology, and that's totally different from America's value and ideology. USA is very important value, as we know. Democracy, and capitalism, and human rights. However, I think China, that's not a number one priority.
China does not have the ideology as an
Yes, China regard the communism is a number one priority, but human rights, democracy is not a number one priority.
I think that's worth some discussion or debate whether China still believes in communism or just authoritarianism.
That's very interesting question.
Okay, we'll move on to the audience questions.
Thank you for very interesting presentations. I'm Young Kim from South Korean Embassy. I'm a new minister counselor. And actually, let's focus on North Korea for a while. Actually, Dr. Zheng knows that North Korea is using China and China is using China to some degree. It's a mutual kind of usage. And I think at current stage, North Korea's game plan is to combine their nuclear weapon and their China together and maximize their leverage in dealing with the United States, right? So if there is a breakthrough in the U.S.-North Korea relationship, in that case, North Korea will move to the another direction maybe. They will try to reduce their dependence on China and so on. They will pursue some kind of independence. So just a couple of hours ago, there was a very interesting news report from Vox. Yes, it's a shape of negotiation. The United States will ask United Nations to suspend sanctions on North Korea's textile and coal export for 36 months in exchange for the verifiable closure of the Yongbyon nuclear facility and on other measures, most likely the end of North Korea's uranium enrichment. Although I don't think this is very near to the reality, but if this kind of situation happens, what would be the Chinese response? If there is a breakthrough in the relationship between North Korea and China, and the United States, and what would be the Chinese countermeasure to maintain China's leverage on North Korea or influence on North Korea?
That's a good question. Be careful what China asks for because it might actually happen, or China actually doesn't believe it will happen. What do you think,
Yeah.
Dr. Zheng?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that if there is a breakthrough between U.S. and the DPRK, China will be very, very happy because China is pushing DPRK and the U.S. to sit down, have a negotiation. So that is the first fruit for DPRK and for U.S. Also, it is for China. And I think the second one is that I want to emphasize that China don't worry about that. China will lose the leverage in DPRK because I have said that China and the DPRK we have 880 miles border. We are there. We are here, and we don't worry about that. DPRK needs more on China, and China needs fewer than what DPRK needs China.
So DPRK needs China more, but
Yeah.
China needs DPRK less.
Yeah.
But if DPRK has a deal with the United States, then DPRK's dependence on China will decrease.
We don't worry that China doesn't worry about that, because, as we all know, DPRK has the political system is very, very different from U.S. They know that. Now, their negotiation with the U.S. and their talks with U.S., they are the temporary, how to survive from the competition between U.S. and China and the conflict between U.S. and the DPRK. And I don't think DPRK will surround to U.S. at now. And from the long-term view, DPRK now and in the future, they still view U.S. as an enemy.
Okay, that probably attests to the question about the ideology, and it does play a role in alluding to a slightly more gloomy future before this discussion. The lady in the back.
Thank you. I'm Sujin Park with the Wilson Center. Thank you for a great discussion. My question is, it's actually a follow-up of the previous question about the nuclear arms race in Northeast Asia. Although I do agree that it's quite unrealistic that South Korea will pursue nuclear arms, and it will be less, it's not popular at all. But I do want to refer to recent remarks by a former South Korean foreign minister who knows very well about the realistic circumstances about the possibility. Just a few days ago, a former minister saying that South Korea could go that path, and also the fact that Steve Biegun in the past few I think past weeks or months mentioned about that. I think that was to create kind of a a nudge for China to do more. But I want to know if that really actually how that is perceived in China about the realistic. How realistic China perceives that as a possibility. I don't know if, whether it really does, send some signs or concerns that South Korea or Taiwan or Japan could really go that path.
I think that's a question for both of you, because you go to China every month, and you are from China. So, are there any realistic perception? 就是说，韩国的那个前外交部长说我们要搞那个核武器，中国什么反应 ？Reaction?
Please.
No reaction. Smile.
I don't have any other information about that. I don't know how Chinese thinking about that kind of speaking, but of course China doesn't happy to hear that kind of news. But I say that I already mentioned that that's not popular in Korea. But I let you know that another interesting thinking about the nuclear weapons in Korea. Actually, there is no popular that we should develop our own nuclear weapons. However, in another expert or another person said that if Japan developing nuclear weapons, we can find the way. We can develop nuclear weapons too. So, USA and China must control the Japan first.
Okay, that's finger pointing. Dr. Zheng, please.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Pa. I think that for ROK, I think the pushing nuclear weapons is some kind of to get leverage from US and the DPRK, even to China. That is some kind of to cry for that.
For compromise or for attention.
Yeah. And the second one is that we think in the first 1980s, and RK, they had some the material of uranium. Yeah, yeah.
1980s.
Yeah.
1980s.
And at late 70s,
Probably.
yeah. And America very annoyed by that. They checked, the U.S. and IAEA checked our case for several times. I think in the UN, P5 cannot accept other countries to become a nuclear state. I think China will be the same to U.S.
Actually, that's not true. You didn't try to develop nuclear weapons. Someone said that during the Park Chung-hee government, former President Park Chung-hee tried to develop a nuclear weapon. However, that's a very basic level. Not a rumor, just a basic level. And we didn't have a IAEA inspection on the nuclear weapons development during the Park Chung-hee period.
I see. So an effort was made that did not escalate the
Just we were considered about the developing nuclear weapons during the Park Chung-hee period. However, we didn't try to develop nuclear weapons concretely.
I see. So you're waiting for Japan to develop it first, and then you can follow up. Maybe last two questions. The lady in the front and the lady in the back. So this one first, lady first.
My name is Kie Kang from Hudson Institute. I have a question to Professor Park. I wonder the Korean point of view, South Korean point of view to joining the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, because as you mentioned, Korean government and tourism made a lot of laws because of the sad revenge economic retaliation by China. So Korea should diversify the trading partners like Australia or India and other ASEAN countries who promote the liberal international order and who promote the value of democracy. So I wonder why the South Korea doesn't try to join in the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, before you open that, answer that, we'll also get the last question from the second row back there. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Young from Wilson Center, and I have a question to both of you. And before asking my question, thank you for you guys for your insightful remarks. And I remember that both of you guys mentioned about the cooperation between middle power states so that they can promote the trust in the trade war. But I wonder of the possibility of the adverse effect that those middle power states would be swept into the conflicts, and China and the United States might urge them to take positions. So don't you see any possibility on this thing or that's happening? Thank you.
Indo-Pacific and also the future of the mid-power alliance.
Yes. First. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Indo-Pacific strategy South Korea's government participation on the Indo-Pacific strategy is also a kind of dilemma of choice. Maybe 2017, November, when President Trump visited South Korea, Trump administration asked the South Korean government, what do you think of the Indo-Pacific strategy? At the time, our high-level official responded that we're thinking about it. However, we didn't decide anything about that. And then our Korean government's position is that basically we welcome Indo-Pacific strategy. However, our position is that the Indo-Pacific strategies should maintain the openness, diversity, and transparency. But these are very diplomatic rhetorics. But in the late June this year, President Trump visited Seoul to meet Kim Jong-un. At that time, South Korean President told Mr. Trump that we want to cooperate the Indo-Pacific strategy. But the conditions is that harmonious our new southern policy. Because Moon government now emphasizing the new southern policy toward India and Southeast Asia. So, however, in my personal view, I think that we should enter the Indo-Pacific strategy. Yeah, because sometimes, based on our national interest, we should take one great power. But sometimes we should take equal behavior. For example, 2016, December, South Korean President Moon Jae-in visited Beijing, and there he said to China President Xi Jinping that South Korea wants to join the One Belt, One Road. And then this year, March, South Korean Prime Minister also told that we want to join the One Belt, One Road. One Belt, One Road is China's very big, grand strategy. And Indo-Pacific strategy is also America's very big, grand strategy. And if I join the One Belt, One Road, then I think we need to also join the Indo-Pacific strategy. And also, I think the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific strategy's goal, what is the goal? What's the goal of Indo-Pacific strategy? Then I think maybe the goal is to engage or check or contain the China. However, now nobody says Indo-Pacific's goal is to contain China. But in the future, I think maybe the Indo-Pacific strategy's goal is changing to the contain the China direction. So I think before that, realize that kind of direction, we should take the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Yeah, because South Korea already joined Belt and Road Initiative as even just as
If we join the One Belt, One Road, then we should also join the Indo-Pacific strategy.
That's a very keen observation. And how about the last question on the alliance among mid-sized middle powers? Any observation?
In the past time, I was a very ideological expert. However, as time goes by, my position changed the real politics. Based on the real politics, there is only great power in the international politics. There is no room for middle power or small power. However, I believe that we still need the room for middle power and small power. So I'd like to say, emphasize the middle power coalition. Actually, the South Korean government already tried to expand the middle power coalition. Maybe from the Byung administration, South Korea emphasized that the MICTA. Have you heard about the MICTA? Yes, thank you. The MICTA means M, Mexico, I, Indonesia, and K, South Korea, T, Turkey, A, Australia. We regard that 5 countries as the middle power countries. So we emphasize that the coalition of MICTA and then expand our middle power's room for international politics. Yes.
Oh, great. So there's a strategy, there's a strategic outlook for the middle power coalition,
Yes,
and
yes.
I think the term is really important. Dr. Zheng, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. First of all, the Indo-Pacific initiative. I think that China, we don't think that we want someone to join it or someone not to join it. We have no that power. But I'm sorry to say that for the Indo-Pacific initiative, their members are U.S., India, and Australia, and Japan.
That's a quad.
That. But one important thing is that who can invest in India, Japan, and U.S. and Australia? They have the money. This is the first thing. From my personal view, the vision of Indo-Pacific initiative is not so good. The second thing is that you can check all the global organizations in the world, especially the economical organizations. If it has no China, I think we cannot hope more. The third one is that we welcome, and China thinks that China can be invited into the Indo-Pacific strategy, and some scholars is studying on it. And now, if China can join in the Indo-Pacific initiative, it will have a very, very good future.
Yeah, I think that conclusion or that assessment is based on the assumption that China will actually be invited and be accepted.
Yeah.
So we're probably a little early in that discussion. But we are 5 minutes over our ending time. But thank you very much for your patience. And thank you, Dr. Zheng and Dr. Park, for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and sharing your observations. These are key issues for all of us, and we will keep observing them and hopefully to invite you back in the future to continue the conversation on this topic. So with that, we conclude the discussion today. Thank you very much for joining.